Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Nuzzo, Director of the Pandemic Center and Professor of Epidemiology here at Brown School of Public Health. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's screening of Mossville. Tonight's event marks the second screening in the Our Storied Health film and media workshop series. Our Storied Health is going to be a year-long series that explores how we can use storytelling and narrative to improve public health. And we're proud to be hosting this series as a partnership between the Brown Pandemic Center and Brown Arts Ignite, which is Brown's multi-year program of creative activations, interventions, and investigations produced by communities across Brown, Providence, Rhode Island, and beyond. In November, we screened our first film called Shot in the Arm. It was a compelling look at the anti-vaccination movement and its profound consequences. What I liked about the film is that it shined a light on the hard work of those who are on the front lines of fighting anti-vaccination sentiment in their communities and across the globe. In particular, I was struck by the experiences of Blima Marcus, who is a nurse practitioner who changed her mind about the risks and benefits of vaccines and then went on to fight misinformation about the vaccines in her own Orthodox Jewish community. Her work is a reminder of the importance of locally led efforts to tackle complex global problems. And that focus on community is relevant for the film that we're showing tonight and our panel discussion. So tonight, we're proud to show Mossville, which is an award-winning film that looks at environmental justice and community-led efforts to address mounting health challenges. Now, some of you may wonder why this film is being shown, screened by the Pandemic Center, and this is not a film that's overtly about pandemics or even infectious diseases. And so I just wanted to kind of give you some context for why we are showing this film. And so my first answer to that question, why the Pandemic Center and why this film, is that the aim of our Storied Health is to explore how we can use storytelling and narrative as public health tools for communication and engagement. We have learned through our experiences in dealing on pandemic-related issues that facts alone are insufficient to change hearts and minds. We need to figure out if we can use feelings and stories to engage and reach people. So we are not going to be limiting the films that we are showing in this screening to stories about pandemic threats or even infectious diseases. So just to know there's more to come in our series, and they're not all about pandemics. And the second reason I want to say why this film is because it does actually touch on, despite not being about infectious diseases, it actually does touch on some important themes that we saw play out throughout the pandemic. One of the important fundamental overarching lessons learned from COVID-19 was that deep inequalities lead to deep disparities in how COVID affected our communities. But I assure you, tonight's conversation is not going to be about COVID. It's a conversation about how evidence and community can be used to make important changes. And to help us have this conversation, at the end of the film, we're going to have a panel discussion featuring three really extraordinary people. And I'm going to introduce them now so that after the film, we can just get up here and have our conversation. So tonight, we're going to be hearing from Erica Walker, who is the RGSS Assistant Professor of Epidemiology at the Brown University School of Public Health. Erica has extensive experience conducting environmental exposure assessments, environmental modeling. She conducts community surveys and really has deep experience conducting community engagement. She directs the Community Noise Lab here at Brown, which generates evidence regarding the relationship between community noise and health. And Erica also works in Mississippi conducting community participatory research on noise, air, and water pollution. We'll also be hearing from Valerie Tutson. Valerie is an alumna of Brown University, and she graduated with a self-designed major, storytelling as a communications art. She also has a Master of Theater and an honorary Doctorate of Fine Arts from Rhode Island College. I feel that this just point in her bio is such a Brown story, and it's something that I'm so proud to be able to tell. Valerie has been putting that storytelling training to work here in Rhode Island and across the globe, telling stories, conducting trainings, convening community members on topics such as folk tales, personal and historical narratives. These efforts have had an emphasis on Black traditions and biblical stories. Valerie is also the founding member and director of Rhode Island Black Storytellers and FUNDA Fest, which is a celebration of Black storytelling. Valerie's bio is extraordinary and very hard to summarize, and suffice to say, it's evidenced by the very many awards she has won throughout her career for all of these varied and critically important efforts, and we're very lucky to have her here tonight. And then our third panel participant is Jennifer Galvin. Jen Galvin is a filmmaker in residence here at the Brown Pandemic Center. She is also the co-creator and co-director of the Our Storied Health film series. Jen is a public health scientist and environmental scientist turned prized filmmaker, which is also very Brown. Unsurprising, she too is an alumna of this university. And her work really brings together her three areas of expertise: science, media, and catalytic investment. So without further ado, I will allow us to start the film, and I'm very interested in having a conversation with these three extraordinary people for talking about not only the topics of the film, but the importance of storytelling and narrative as a public health tool. So thank you.
I always take a deep breath after that film. It's a lot, but I hope that you all enjoyed it. Just a reminder that when we created Our Storied Health, we wondered just how far we can take the connection between visual storytelling and community action. We hope that film screenings like this one create a new type of common resource, generating a groundswell of shared learning and shifting viewers from simply watching to doing. We've curated tonight's panel with two women who are leading deep, creative, place-based solutions and who will help us show us the way. We welcome Valerie and Erica.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with kind of a panel discussion, and then we'll bring it out to you all in the audience for any questions that you may have. Erica, I think we just want to start from the beginning, because you have an interesting journey that was perhaps fueled by your environment too. Can you tell us your origin story of becoming a community health researcher?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. So I grew up in a town like Mossville. I'm from a small town outside of Jackson, Mississippi called Mendenhall, Mississippi. So when I saw all of that and heard all of that, it was very reminiscent of the community that I came from. But like a lot of people, as soon as I had an opportunity to flee, I did. I ended up coming to New England, going to school, and then had a chance encounter one day. Like I left that environment behind, became an artist, made coffee tables and furniture, and was a bookbinder. And then like one day, this family moved in above me with two small kids, and they ran across my floor, their floor, which was my ceiling, all the time. And that kind of got me back to that sort of oral experience that I had when I was growing up. So I sort of switched gears. So through that process of being triggered by that event with my upstairs neighbors, I kind of refocused and began a life of environmental health. So very, very weird. So I came from an environmental injustice community, escaped, became an artist, and then came back to what I'm studying and doing today.
Valerie, you designed your own storytelling major here at Brown and never looked back. You never left Providence after your time here at Brown. Tell us more about what you've learned about storytelling as a call to action and the healing power of storytelling.
Oh boy, how to say that? And yes, I've never looked back. I leave a lot, however, and so have had the opportunity to be in many different storytelling spaces, and the connection with this film in South Africa was also resonating with me, because the first place on the continent that I visited after I went to Brown was South Africa. So very interesting to kind of tie that back in. I would say that one of the things that I have learned in the storytelling work that I do is how powerful stories are And so how careful we need to be about how we tell them. Because, there's a lot more research now that says our brain doesn't really know the difference whether we are living this experience or watching a movie or hearing a story, which is why you said we need to take a deep breath after the story that we just heard. And one of the things that I kept thinking about and feeling when I was watching that film was the need for this particular poem by Claude McKay, If We Must Die. Does anybody, do you know? I'm going to read it to you because it kept coming to me how important it is to, as a storyteller, if we're going into the darkness, my job as a storyteller is also to help people find their way out. I cannot leave people in a place of despair. And I learned that actually right across the street at Rights and Reason Theater with George Houston Bass, who was one of the co-founders, who said, we cannot leave our people in a place of woundedness and despair. We have to find a way for people to feel empowered in order to go on, right? So I was really struck by the prayer and the way, the film opened with Once Upon a Time There Was, and I want people to remember, so what does that mean? So Claude McKay in 1919, after the Red Summer, where many African American communities were being attacked, right, after World War I, and black soldiers were coming home and places were being attacked. So Claude McKay wrote this poem, which I have always loved. Hold on. Where is it? Oh, Lord. Here it is. Sorry. I'm so not a techie person, but here you go. So listen. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the empty grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. And that's what I felt. I wanted to uplift that fight.
Thank you for
So,
that.
yeah, if that answered your question.
Yes. Incredibly so. Erica, thinking about kind of riffing off of what Valerie just shared with us, when you're doing the work that you're doing about very serious community health threats, how do you drop us into the conversations that you might have with people that you're asking to study them, bodies, environment? How do you have these conversations? I liked the line from the film where he talked about land being dignity. How do you, make sure that dignity is a North Star?
Well, I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I'm working with communities that were very similar to the ones that I grew up in. So I think I get the benefit of understanding what they're going through because it's something that I went through. But I think I kind of start with, like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, why do you want me here, and why do you want me here? And then I kind of let the conversation go from there. So while I am a noise expert, I guess, by training, if they want me to study something else, then I'm going to study that something else. So I sort of led by what the community wants. But at the end of the day, they're all connected. If you saw from that video, you saw the water, you saw the air pollution, you heard it. So they're all connected. So I don't feel like by, being directed by the communities that I'm losing my way. I feel like I'm trying to tell this complete story. But I have to say that as a person who grew up, I'm going to say something probably controversial, but for me, if the story doesn't bring about tangible change, then for me, it's just another story. And I just know that, like, my community hasn't changed for the better. It's actually gotten worse. And so for me, it's like we can sit up here and experience what these people are going through, but if we're not really doing anything to tangibly impact their lives, then for me, it's just a waste of time.
I was butting in. I don't know what y'all are planning, but I was struck by them showing us in the film the community organizing that was happening in South Africa around the similar situation. And what struck me in this film was, the dispersal of community, because that's what happens, right? Like, when we're united, we're strong, and when our voices are together, we can do something, right?
I don't
No,
think so.
we can't. You're right.
I don't think so, because
No, you're
nothing's
right.
changed.
Oh, my
Nothing's
Lord.
changed.
What am I saying?
No, nothing's changed. I mean, it sounds great, but I think the reality is in the past 40 years since I've been in my community, nothing's changed. And so when we see this story tonight, we'll be like, oh, wow, this was a great documentary. But we saw that no one won. Everyone lost.
Except for the company.
Except for the companies. So it's just like, why are we here this evening?
Yeah, it's true. So Val, one of the questions that you almost sort of started approaching was thinking about this story through, thinking about it as a storyteller. Were there things that struck you from a storyteller's perspective, whether it was the structure or something that sticks with you in terms of a challenge that you face as a storyteller? Just what you're both kind of talking about.
Well,
And some tips. Could you share some tips to how you might, approach that as a storyteller?
Well, and I'm going to say as a Black storyteller, too, trying to tell a Black story, right? Like, one of the things that I always try to do, like I said before, is to present something that shows us strong. Because they're not broken. I mean, we're all broken, and we are broken, but unless we can see, because nothing has changed and nothing is going to change, and it goes on and on and on, we still need to feel strong enough to battle what is happening in today, right? So I kept thinking of Stanley in a way of, flipping, not necessarily flipping it, but like a John Henry, which could be a tragic story, right? But often the way Black folks tell about, do y'all know about John Henry? He was a steel-driving man with a hammer in his hand, and he, beat the railroad, and he fell down and he died, but he, did it, and that's often a story. Now, we could look at that and say that's a terrible story to tell, but if you need to feel empowered to go out and face the stuff that happens every day, you need to know that, just like you need to be reminded of the songs. Ain't gonna let no sassle turn me round, turn me round, turn me round, ain't gonna, because you have to be fortified for that. So that's the way that I would think about it. Like, how, when I tell this story, can I tell it as awful as it is and still, as you talked about, make a space for people to say, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do this thing, whatever that thing is, as opposed to, oh my God, I feel so devastated. And I remember, that commercial on TV when I was a kid where they showed the Native American guy crying over the river, like that. It was so painful, but what it inspires a bit about caring for the land, but one of the things that struck me that was noted in this story too was when you are a culture or a corporation, a corporate culture that it's not just disregard for the people, it's disregard for the earth herself. And those things are inextricably bound. So if you were to kind of, and I'm not sure how I would do it, I'm thinking out loud, you know, but how do you take even Stanley's first line of, because I wrote it down, and he said it again at the end, right? He said, once there was a community founded by free slaves, and we were free. Because the land has been beaten, but the blood and bones are still there. So as a storyteller, maybe I would say, if the land could speak, what would she say? And who would she be calling in to turn this back to fertile ground? I'm making that
No,
up.
I love that. No, I think that's really powerful.
Right?
Can I just
Yeah.
add in there? I'm glad I'm not a storyteller because I think that it would be very hard to tell that story, because if I go into a community, I'm going to respect them and love them enough to tell them the truth. And usually the truth is nothing's going to change. And, you know, maybe that's just me being bitter, but I'm very glad that I don't have to tell a story of resilience, because I think that resilience is a trauma response. And so I just feel very fortunate that I don't have to do that, that I'll go in and measure the
That's
pollutant
interesting.
and keep it moving.
Resilience as a trauma
Oh,
response.
absolutely. I think that you would all agree that the people that you saw in that movie, in that documentary, were very resilient, but at what expense? I think everything that you saw there was a trauma response, and for me to have to tell that story would be triggering, and it would also just be really sad. Like, I have to tell you the truth. You're probably going to have to take that deal, and you're probably going to have to leave.
Right.
This is probably going to kill you. You know, those are the things. So I don't know how to tell that story without just being blunt.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Just sitting here listening is really, really fascinating, really powerful conversation, and just wondering, like, how and if we tell the stories, and if there's peril in telling the stories, or if there's peril in not telling the stories, and sort of when we decide, trying to decide how and if we tell the stories, and if there's peril in telling it or peril in not telling it, and how we make the decision. I'm struck by a friend of mine is now a professor, but used to be a high school teacher, and she taught environmental science. And every time she got to the section talking about climate change, it just devastated the classroom. And she found herself as a teacher with these kids talking about climate change, where it was a very, very heavy, depressing, really, upsetting topic, wanting to say, but it's okay, it's going to be okay. Because that's the normal human response when you see particularly young people upset, you want to make them feel better. But she started realizing, it's actually not okay, but I have to teach it. So how do I teach it? And actually, that's why she went and got a doctorate and became a professor. And one of the things she started studying was how you teach about science and then deal with that emotional piece of it, how emotional narratives shape our understanding of science and how we teach it. So I guess this is a very long-winded question, which is like, how do we decide what stories to tell if the story is told? How do we decide when, like, there isn't an upside necessarily, and where we're at risk of trying to impose a false upbeat narrative when there may in fact not be one? Does that mean we don't tell the story? Anyway, that's something that I'm wrestling with, sort of hearing our conversation. Any
I think
thoughts?
that you tell a story, you just respect and love the community and tell them that the story, maybe no one's going to hear it, maybe some people will respond to it, but ultimately I feel like, in my very jaded and bitter view of things, that the stories are made for us that are here tonight, but they're not necessarily meant to impact the lives of the people that they're showcasing. So I think the stories are to make us feel a certain kind of way. Maybe you'll go home and hug your children a little tighter tonight, or thank the Lord for what you have, but I think that's it. And for me, if that's the purpose of the story, then it's a poor story. And if I can't tell a story, well, I'm not a storyteller, but if I had the option to tell a story, it would be only if it led to some sort of tangible impact. Otherwise, I'm just like, it's a waste of time.
Yeah. I think one of the things I liked about this story, despite the fact that it didn't have sort of that kind of call to action, what I liked about it was that the team was from that place, the producers, and the lawyer actually that we saw in the film, Erica, also, she brought the story to that team, and then they said, you know, we want as a community to share this in the hopes that maybe, like we're kind of done, but maybe it can help someone else. And I think, you know, I think that's one of the things that, you know, Nuzzo and I are really struggling with, given all that we've been going through with COVID, is how can storytelling help to rebuild trust? And as a storyteller, I feel like that's what storytelling has always been best at. So how do we really harness that for the field of public health? I don't know if you have anything to add about that in terms of like thinking about storytelling as a tool for building trust, or thinking about, you know, when you go into a community that you have to really anchor trust and transparency with why you're there and, you know, what's going to happen. I do have a question for you about the noise cameras coming into Providence, but I don't know, anything about...
Well, and that means creating a safe space for people to actually tell their stories, whatever they are,
And
which
by
is
who? Yeah.
Yes, by who, but also like if you're calling people together to share stories, then that means everybody should have the opportunity to have a voice, right? Potentially. And that makes it complicated.
Yeah.
It makes it
Absolutely.
complicated. But that's also where the richness is, if you're really talking about creating spaces of trust, and they're not easy. And they're not going to be easy, and you're going to have all different ideas about what to say and why to say it, or how to, or even different perspectives on it, you know. And I love the notion that you don't really know a story until you've heard it 1,000 times, because every voice is going to tell it from a different perspective in order to get to, you know, whatever it is. Like, we're all looking at that thing, but we're all seeing it from a slightly different angle, but it still is that thing.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your work with the Rhode Island Department of Health as a storyteller?
Sure, and there's some Anissa's out here too from the Art and Health Commission. You know, I can't even remember how many years ago, but at 10 years ago, there was an effort between folks at the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts and the Rhode Island Department of Health, Stephen Boudreau and Sherry Brown, really wanted to come together and form this partnership with the understanding that artists work at the intersection with the public. And so much of the work that we do helps people. You know, sometimes there are things that are art therapy, but also just being engaged in arts practice often makes us open to possibilities and different ways of communicating. So for the past there was an arts commission, and now there's actually a partnership where the Rhode Island Department of Health puts an artist in health settings as a way to help use the arts specifically to help engage in community arts practice. And certainly we know there's a growing field of community health. So when you're talking about the social determinants of health and how do people feel connected and how do they see themselves and how are they respected? I mean, there's so many different ways that we've been exploring in this partnership between the Rhode Island Department of Health and the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. And I think we were the first official partnership in the nation to really do this, although there is a national organization of arts and health, and there's some work being done in Florida, but we are the first official partnership to really look at this at the state level, which I think is fabulous. So there's a lot more work to do, but a really exciting, juicy partnership to be a part of.
That's great. Before we throw it to the audience, I do want to ask you a little bit about the noise cameras that might be coming to Providence. And I know you've expressed concerns about surveillance and that communities of color will be disproportionately impacted. So, I don't know, given that you study noise, so you're studying the noise, so you get the results, and then this might be an outcome. Can you just speak to that?
I actually have a student, his name is Imran. He is actually doing a huge study on that by interviewing concerned residents, audio enthusiasts, and politicians in different communities across the United States. So I think he could speak better than I could. But it's not, I think like when you ask yourself questions about what should happen, what kind of policies should we implement, we just sort of come with this like, oh, that's a shiny idea, and we don't think about the downwind consequences. As you can see here, things can spiral out of control pretty quickly. Yeah. So I always give this story. This is actually a true story, and I'll be very quick. In New York City, there's literally a street, and on one half of the street is traditionally Latino immigrants, and on the other half of the street is Polish immigrants. And I always tell people, if you're going to put a camera on that street, so that the kind of stereotypes will be that the Latino communities is a little louder, they're very celebratory. The Polish people, by stereotype, are quieter. So if you're going to put a camera on that street, what side of the street are you going to put it on, and why? And I think in a lot of our environmental injustices, it just comes from not really thinking through the downwind consequences of anything. We're just sort of settling for right now instead of the right decision. So I just think that until it's well thought out, it's just going to be another in a long list of poor decisions that will have pretty serious environmental consequences. So I just don't think it's being thought out yet.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions before we go to the audience?
No, let's open it up for conversation.
Yeah.
I think there are microphones, and the hands are raised. Sorry, the lights are bright. I can't see who's raising, but. Just have to. Microphones are coming, I think.
Oh, okay.
Great, here they come.
Do you want to add something?
No.
You go ahead,
I'll wait.
please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm just hearing Erica's, pain around like telling the truth and all of that stuff, and perhaps it's because I was at the Langston Hughes poetry reading yesterday, right? And I was thinking, like the arts operate on so many levels. Part of it is telling the truth. Part of it is showing the ugly truth, the underbelly, and part of it is maintaining that dreamer, so that we can get out of bed tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Do I just speak? Is it on?
No.
Oh, okay. So I have an idea that I started thinking about in terms of science, and then I found that it was actually quite applicable to social studies, and I think certainly in terms of things like what's going on among people. And that is, and hopefully this sort of makes sense with your idea of not leaving a story, not leaving the audience and the listener and the reader in despair, but also not telling the, I forgot how you put it, it's a trauma story, if it's a story of resilience. And I think actually there's a way of sort of balling that up and saying that sometimes the purpose is to ask better questions. So I find in science, I never get answers, and I'm not, really that smart in science, but good science, I think, actually generates better questions. So that's one thought I'd like to offer. And then another thing about humanity, and first of all, my reaction to the film was, my God, how am I going to go home and lay my head on my pillow tonight? And during the film, I was saying, oh, well, they did this, and that's so wrong, and how could they let? And then I thought, wait a minute, I have a pension. I know it's invested in private equity or whatever, hedge. And so that Sasol is me. And I think it's very important always to identify the enemy and then recognize the enemy in yourself. I'm not really sure how much of my pension is paying for Sasol, but I think the idea of synthetic jet fuel has already been flown around and whatever. So that's another thought I wanted to offer. I certainly see a lot of what humans do as the rape of the earth. That's just the only way that I feel that I can express it. But then I tell myself what we are is a catalyst. So we think we're all that self-important. We think we can break things and then fix them. But I think that what we are is a catalyst. And nature will prevail because none of us would be here now. If you look at history, it's all been bad. And there's no reason why any of us are here except for the fact that there is some sort of resilience in nature. Our future iterations may have 4 arms and 3 eyes because we're going to have to change with all the weird stuff that's going on. But I think that we are a catalyst and nature will continue. And I'll just stop at that. Thank you for your time and thank you for this wonderful presentation. Still not sure how I'm going to sleep tonight.
Well, you know, besides being Sasol, let me also say there are parts of Providence that are also fighting for environmental justice support. And you know, we've got stuff down along Allens Avenue and the port down there where people are involved with trying to make sure that that area is cleaned up, because what comes from there goes into my neighborhood in the South Side, which is where most Black and brown people live. So we could find those places and spaces here should people be interested.
I really like your thought about being a catalyst and asking better questions. But I really like it because I think, so a large part of my work is working with the younger generation. And so I think if, you know, so all of the methods that we do from measuring air pollution to water quality, we're training the young people in that community to be able to take those measurements and be able to speak to their local officials about what's going on. So I think that catalyst is sort of like these younger generations, like the guy's kid in the movie. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names. You know, like what if he has the power to measure his own air or water quality? I think that training that younger generation is creating that catalyst that can actually demand a lot more than previous generations. And they can ask those questions because they're still brave.
And not as jaded yet.
Yeah, and not bitter like myself.
Right. REJC, the Racial Environmental Justice, are they the committee? Anyway, they're local here, and it's a lot of young people.
Yeah.
So I recommend connecting with the REJC.
Nice to meet you, by the way.
So I had a question. My name is Walmart James. I'm a professor at the School of Public Health and a strategic advisor to the Pandemic Center. But I'm also a South African, and I'm a former member of Parliament from South Africa. And I was a ranking member of the Health Committee. And so I'm telling you that partly because I'm deeply ashamed of what I just saw, but also because there's a few things that I think one needs to understand in order to understand what the remedy is to the issue that's being raised here, because it's clearly a global remedy, and it's certainly a South African and American remedy. First of all, South Africa has lots of natural resources, with one exception: it doesn't have oil. The oil stops in Angola. It comes from Nigeria, Gabon, down to Angola. There is no oil in South Africa. And during the apartheid years, there were sanctions and boycotts, and it struggled to buy oil in the stock market. So it started this company, firstly. Secondly, there's lots of coal, but it's low grade, and there's lots of gold, and it's also low grade. So it takes a lot of damage to the earth to get the stuff out of the ground. And so the chemical bleaching that happens and the chemical contamination that happens is vast. And what we try to do in Parliament is regulate that, not just Sasol, but also regulate the entire mining industry. So it's been an ongoing battle. And my view would be that the remedy to this is to turn to the law. The only time South Africa took the right action when it came to the rollout of antiretrovirals during the AIDS pandemic was by order of the courts. And the only time it really takes major action is if it's compelled by the courts. The South African Constitution has a provision that the US Constitution does not have, where people have the right to health. It's a constitutional principle. So you can in fact legislate on that basis, and you can also take them to court for violating that principle. So there's a need for a class action suit here, very clearly, and there's a need to shame South Africa globally. It is one of the biggest polluters on the planet, and yet it participates in, in climate negotiations as a credible partner. So, but on this, I mean, this is an incredibly powerful story you told, but we also need to tell it to the right people. We need to tell it to the legal fraternity, and I will make every effort possible to help that along, if I can just say that, because this is just disgraceful. So I just wanted to share that with you.
You know what, your story reminds me of when I was trying to fight my upstairs neighbors, trying to take them to court. I looked in my lease, and it had the right for quiet enjoyment. I don't know, have you guys looked at that in your lease? And I was like, aha, I'm going to get them. And then, like, when I went to the court, they were like, yeah, that means that your landlord can't come into your house without, like, without giving you proper notice. So it was just like that kind of reminded me, like, wow, that's actually written in the Constitution in South Africa. But I kind of got total anecdote, but like, or total sidebar. But it's just reminding me when I thought I'd solved the world when I saw that right to quiet enjoyment.
Did you go by yourself?
To the court? Yes.
So here's what brings me back to what I saw in South Africa in that piece, right? It was community engagement. It was bringing people together. It was telling, so that's part of the process. It's learning what the laws are. It's learning what the policies are. Because as the Jamaican storyteller who was just here for FUNDA reminded us, one hand can't clap, right? One hand can't clap. And it's that thing, we can't. And so this is the part of, going back to your question, post-COVID, where we've gotten really comfortable and we've gotten comfortable being in isolation. Even if we're not comfortable with it, we've gotten used to it, and we're not as comfortable figuring out how to come together in ways that we can make community, action. Students are doing that right now. Here at Brown, you got 19 students who are doing a hunger strike, saying Brown needs to divest from companies doing, investing in Israel right now. Who's talking about that, right? I heard it on NPR. I heard it from my friend in New York. But this is what can happen and does happen on a university campus, right? This is, and it isn't just, it can't be one person. It doesn't work as one person for the real change to happen in the laws or the policies.
I agree with that.
So, what help you need, let us know.
I would also say, too, just to, I don't know if we're out of time yet, but I'll keep this really short. I think in addition to, I think a large part of the distrust that happened during COVID is that we were actually not telling the right stories. I think that we were sort of given these blanket directives that were coming from some stories from some place, but we weren't really understanding what was happening on the ground. So I think we lost a lot of trust because we weren't telling the right stories. We weren't, at the time when COVID was happening, no one was talking about a water crisis in Jackson, that, people weren't even able to have clean, fresh running water. Or we weren't talking about this incessant firework activity that happened during the heart of the stay-at-home advisories when Black and brown communities were inundated with firework noise. We were just talking about, I remember I got a prompt from some journalist like, hey, Erica, how quiet is it in your community? And if I would have just taken that prompt, because my neighborhood was quiet, and not actually listened to what was on the ground, I would have focused on the wrong story. So I think that we also need to make sure that we're telling the right stories and that we always have our ears to the ground and are listening to what's happening, even if it goes in opposition to what you want to do or what you personally believe in. I think it's important to have your ears on the ground, and I think that's something that we really failed as public health practitioners, is that we got lost in certain stories and we totally ignored some real stories that if we would have listened to them, we would have made policies and procedures that would have reached a lot more people as opposed to alienating them. So I felt like it's also important for us to tell the right stories. And that leads to trust, right?
Yeah.
If you're coming to my community and you know what's going on and you weigh all of that when you're making policies or decisions about what's best for us, number one, you're going to make better policies and you're going to make better choices. And number two, the people are going to trust that you got their back.
Which is related to the asking better questions as well, too. Right?
Exactly.
And I have to just point something out, because I heard you tell the story about how you showed up when you were doing your research and you had noise on your agenda, and then you met the community, and the community was like, that's not our agenda.
Correct.
And you changed.
Correct.
And I have to say that that's extraordinary as a scientist, that you were able to do that. That's what should be done, but it is not a baked-in trait that researchers often have, and it's a real credit to you. And I think, you say you're glad that you're not the one telling the story, but you are involved in the work of storytelling,
But I'm not
and
telling the
perhaps from the position of listening. So I'm hearing about asking the questions is implying about the listening and trying to understand what the story is.
Yeah, the power of the pivot.
The power of the pivot. So what are you doing now if it's not noise?
It's water.
Okay.
Water. Oh, I love that.
Great. I'm sorry, question up there. So, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to say something positive and hopeful. I was struck by your saying you're jaded and maybe the story only stays in this room, and I just feel like I wanted to say something that was very hopeful. And I thought about on the quiet green here at Brown, and most of you are probably familiar with it, but there's the I don't know if it's called the monument or the to slavery, and it's a ball and chain, not quite submerged in the earth, right? Because it can never be totally submerged, because truth and justice will never be completely buried, and truth will never be completely silenced. And so that will eventually, those ripples will get bigger and bigger, and things will get better. And I just really feel that way. And I know that the last almost 8 years now have been, sort of hard to have as much hope, right? Because it seems like things are going in the wrong direction. But I always remind myself that the degree of that pushback is based on the magnitude of the fear that those people feel. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Appreciate that. I want to believe you. Appreciate that.
I don't need that. So, referencing legal avenues that the former MP of South Africa mentioned, there is an organization that...
The mic for the recording.
Do I need it? I'm sorry. So in referencing the legal avenues that the former MP of South Africa mentioned as a possible avenue, there's an organization called the NRDC, National Resources Defense Council, that takes on these battles. And their motto is because the earth needs a good lawyer. So not a question, but just a point of reference as a resource that people can find out about. And if the only thing that we can do is use our money, then maybe we can invest with them.
And if you don't have money, use your voice. Make a song.
I'm just thinking of the many times when, there have been legal actions and it's gone nowhere because you just can't get past people not understanding the situation, especially when it comes to things like noise, where there's like no laws on the books. Like you can literally be as loud as you want to be, and there's nothing written that says you can't be louder than this. And, there are things, but they're not really, they're not adhered to in any kind of meaningful way. So it's very disheartening to kind of build that case and then realize that it's not going to go anywhere. And that's happened lots of times. Because I work with like Southern Poverty Law Center, things, and it's just like, I mean, I can't tell you how many of these stories of Mossville I've either collected data in or testified on behalf of, and it always ends with nothing, like snake eyes. But like I said, y'all got me on a bitter day. maybe after like Valentine's Day I'll be better. But right now I am bitter.
I do wonder, though, on that point about the relative, like, compelling power of the data, which is really important to be able to understand what's happening, versus the human aspect of it. Like, seeing people's lived experience and feeling and generating that sense of empathy, to me, makes that situation and then the data behind it come alive in a way that just presenting the numbers wouldn't.
Oh,
Yeah,
definitely, definitely. The numbers, well, I'm not a numbers person, for
You
sure.
are.
Yes.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
I think I saw a question over there. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ruth. I'm a first year here at Brown.
Yay!
I think I just wanted to ask that, like, even with the rise of more sustainable energy sources like solar and wind, do you guys think that there will still be, like, communities like Mossville?
Can we? Sorry.
Yes.
No, you're okay. Basically, like, hurt by these, like, private companies coming in, and if so, how do we tell their stories, because the damages aren't as explicit as Sasol with oil.
So investigate the stories of the east side of Providence, where you have come to school, and see what you can learn about the Cape Verdean community that used to be all up and down Wickenden Street. See what you can learn about the Cape Verdean councilman who is fighting to try to preserve the neighborhood as Brown is taking over and going across the river. See what you can find. It is happening here. Professor Danny Ritchie has done a lot of work doing the research around the changing neighborhoods, not just the Fox Point area, but the Mount Hope area, which was a Black community. So it is happening right here. And yes, solar is great for all of these things, right? So let's buy the property from these lovely old Cape Verdean and Black people who've been living here for a long time, and we'll offer them some money for their formerly historic homes, which really are loaded with lead paint, and nobody can afford what it takes to get the lead paint out of them. So we'll just buy up the property. And so now people who've been here for generations can't afford to live here. People who are coming to work at Brown can't afford to buy a house in Providence anymore.
And I work in a community now in Mississippi where they are now being inundated with these wood pellets. I don't know if you've heard of wood pellets, but it's supposed to be like this form of, like you can burn them in stoves. But it's supposed to be a renewable source of energy, green energy, and it literally looks just like Mossville. It's loud, it has lots of different kinds of air pollutants. So I think it's just people, with these kind of solar, wind, they still have these very harmful environmental issues just like Mossville, but they've just been packaged better. They got a better marketing team. But I could take you to a community in Mississippi right now that looks just like Mossville, but they are manufacturing renewable energy sources, green technology. So I just think they may have a better marketing strategy, but it's still just as disastrous.
Because we're not thinking about how it's being made. We're just, as you said, being told how this is going to help us and help the world.
Correct.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just had a comment just to not diminish from the need for this, action as we saw in this movie, but just reminded about the storytelling and value, just touched on that a little, like to not forget the people. Like it was a pretty hopeless story because nobody won. But that idea that we don't want to forget those people, and hopefully by remembering and honoring those people that were there and the stories in Vail, just as you were saying, in this neighborhood, like the need to keep collecting stories is so important so we don't forget the people, and then hopefully it will make us motivated to do something more in the future. But collecting the stories is important.
Okay, one more. Yep.
Any more questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, I was curious, you referenced like slow change and how important that is, and I've done a lot of work within environmental justice, and I find that to be really important as well, but very frustrating sometimes because there's a lot of fast change going around us. And I was wondering if you have any words to that, and like how can we balance like putting the necessary efforts to have like slow, thoughtful change while being surrounded by these like fast counter movements.
I didn't understand.
Do you know the story, The Tortoise and the Hare? That's what just popped in my
Yeah.
head for that. Right?
Yeah.
That, and it has, you know, I'm a grown-up. It's such a child's story. And yet the wisdom in that story seems to me to speak to that, right? Like, be the turtle, be the tortoise. Know that slow and steady ultimately wins the race. The long race, which is long past us, started before us. I would say one of the things that I have learned in my study of stories that are not just stories of the here and now is that we are a blip in the long story of humanity. And everything that we're experiencing, it's not true. I'm telling a lie, but it's true too. Everything we're going through is not new. It's just a different dress, right? So be the tortoise. They live a long time.
So I think that's a good note to end with the story and the central narrative, which is the theme of this event. And so I think that's a great place to end this. I have to thank our incredible panelists for this really moving, provoking, just activating conversation. Really quite extraordinary. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us.
Thanks for having us.
Nice to meet
And
everyone.
thanks for you.
I think many of us, we're all going to just take this with us and ruminate on it for quite some
Yeah.
time. I would also like to thank the leadership and staff of Brown Arts Ignite, amazing Avery, Willis Hoffman, Melissa Kiefman, and everyone who's been scurrying around making this happen, both here tonight and also in the weeks leading up to this. Would also like to thank my Brown Pandemic Center colleagues, Bentley Holt, Leah Lovegren, Aquail Person, Andy Ulig, Carly Gasca, and Will Goodell, who suggested this film. If you like this event and you want to hear more, participate in more, I'd encourage you to check out the Pandemic Center's website, which is www.thepandemiccenter.org. There's an events page. We post all sorts of events, but including our next Our Storied Health film series, which is scheduled for April 3rd, 6 p.m. So please stay in touch on that front. And if you'd like to keep this conversation going, both the Pandemic Center and Brown Arts Ignite have social media channels. Feel free to tag us in those conversations. And with that, I think we have the ability to adjourn to a reception outside. So thank you all.